It's funny what you build your life on. For some people, it's money or family or faith. For me, it was my voice. Just my voice. The way it felt rolling off my tongue, the perfect, crisp enunciation of every consonant, the smooth, resonant flow of every vowel. My name is Nicole, and for a decade, I was the most trusted voice in Sweden. I'd sit in that brightly lit studio in Stockholm, a camera lens staring at me like a great unblinking eye, and I'd speak. I'd speak in Swedish, then pivot to English for an international segment, maybe conduct an interview in French, German, or Spanish. The words were my soldiers, and I was their general, deploying them with perfect precision. People said I had a gift. They had no idea. It wasn't a gift. It was a fortress built brick by painful brick over a childhood of silence and shame. A fortress to keep the memory of a little girl with a mouthful of marbles at bay. A girl who couldn't say her own name without choking on the syllables. My earliest memories aren't of birthday parties or scraped knees. They're of the hot sting of shame. I remember being 6 years old, standing in front of my class, trying to read a simple sentence from a book. The words were right there on the page, clear as day, but my mouth wouldn't obey. It was like a mutiny. My tongue felt thick and clumsy, a useless slab of meat. The S sounds hissed and spat. The R's were swallowed into a garbled mess. The other kids started to giggle, that high-pitched, cruel sound that only children can produce. The teacher's face was a mask of strained pity. I just stood there, my face burning, the words trapped in my throat like birds in a cage, fluttering and dying before they could take flight. That shame became the engine of my life. It drove me through years of grueling speech therapy, hours spent in front of a mirror, my small hands clutching my jaw, forcing my tongue to move in ways that felt alien. I repeated rhymes and tongue twisters until my throat was raw, each correctly pronounced word a small, bloody victory. I became obsessed. I didn't just want to speak. I wanted to master speech itself. I devoured languages, collecting them like trophies. Each new language was another layer of armor, another wall in my fortress. So when I finally sat behind that news desk for the first time, my voice flowing out of the monitors clear and strong, it wasn't just a career. It was my salvation. It was the ultimate proof that I had conquered the broken little girl inside me. I had buried her under a mountain of perfect diction. The first time I heard of Lauren, the collector, as the international press called him, it was just another story on the teleprompter. A string of gruesome murders unsettling the quiet, orderly suburbs of Uppsala. The details were clinical, as they are always at first. But then came the signature, the detail that made the producers in my earpiece go quiet. The victims, all of them known for their voices, a singer, a politician, a radio host, were found with their tongues missing, not just cut out, but removed with a horrific surgical precision. I remember reading the words, my own voice, my perfect practice voice, describing the horror. But inside, something cold and primal was awakening. The camera zoomed in for a close-up, and I saw my own reflection in the lens, poised, professional, unshaken. But it was a lie. A police sketch of the suspect flashed on the screen behind me, a hunched figure, his eyes wide and manic, a tool belt heavy with gleaming instruments around his waist. He wasn't big or muscular, just wrong. The report said he believed he was performing an act of mercy. He was ending their misery. I finished the broadcast on autopilot, the words flowing perfectly as always. But as I drove home that night, the silence of my car felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, listening. The story wasn't just a story, it was a monster from a forgotten nightmare, and it was whispering my name. It was an attack on the very concept of a voice, And for a woman who had built her entire world on that foundation, it felt like the first tremor of an earthquake that could bring it all crashing down. The little girl with the tangled tongue was screaming inside me, and for the first time in 20 years, I was afraid she was about to break free. The next few weeks were a blur of escalating fear across the country. The collector became a national obsession. Every news broadcast, including my own, led with updates on his grotesque spree. He was a ghost, leaving behind nothing but mutilated bodies and a wave of silent terror. The police were helpless, and the public was frantic. For me, it was a slow, creeping poison. Every time I had to say his name, every time I had to describe his methods, it felt like I was scraping a raw nerve. My work, my sanctuary, had become a torture chamber where I was forced to confront my deepest fear night after night in front of millions of people. My carefully constructed composure was beginning to crack at the edges. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in the dark and imagine a hunched shadow standing over me, the glint of scissors in the moonlight. My apartment, a sleek, modern space on the top floor of a secure building in Sodermalm, had always been my refuge. It was a place of quiet control. Now it felt like a glass cage. The sprawling view of the city lights, once a comfort, now seemed to expose me, making me feel like I was on a stage for an audience of one. The fear was irrational, I told myself. He was in Uppsala, nearly an hour's drive away. I was just another journalist reporting a story. There was no connection. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a low hum of anxiety that followed me everywhere, a feeling of being watched, of being listened to. The night it became real for me, I had left the studio late. A storm was rolling in, the sky a bruised purple, and the air was thick with the smell of rain. I remember the sound of my heels clicking on the pavement, an unusually loud and lonely sound in the empty street. When I got to my apartment building, I saw it immediately. A small, square box wrapped in simple brown paper, sitting right in front of the main entrance door. It wasn't at my personal apartment door, but the main entrance to the whole building, which was even stranger. My doorman, Lars, a kindly man with a weathered face, was on this break, so no one had seen who left it. I hesitated. Fan mail was common, but it was always screened at the station. This was different. It felt intentional. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. It was light, almost weightless. There was no address, no stamp, just my name, Nicole, written in the center in letters that looked like they were cut from magazines. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I clutched the box to my chest and hurried inside, the feeling of being watched now so intense it was like a physical touch on the back of my neck. I didn't even take my coat off. I walked into the sterile white of my kitchen and placed the box on the marble island, staring at it as if it were a bomb. My hands trembled as I tore at the paper. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to call the police, to throw it out the window, but I couldn't. I had to know. Inside the brown paper was a simple black box. I lifted the lid. There, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried grass, was a small, desiccated object. It was brownish gray, curled at the edges like an old leaf. It was leathery and hard, and for a long moment my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was just an object, a piece of something. Then I saw the faint, telltale ridges, the subtle, unmistakable shape of the tip. My breath caught in my throat, a choked, silent gasp. It was a tongue. Not a human one. It was too small for that. It looked like it belonged to a bird. The blood drained from my face and a wave of nausea washed over me. My legs felt weak and I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling. Tucked beneath the gruesome trophy was a small folded piece of paper. It was another collage of cut-out letters. 2 words. For you. That was all. I stared at them, the world shrinking to just that box, that horrifying little token, and those 2 words. The storm broke then, rain lashing against my floor-to-ceiling windows.
A sudden flash of lightning illuminated my living room, and in that split second, I saw it. A new file on the desktop of my laptop, which I left open on the coffee table. A single stark file named Practice. My blood rang cold. I hadn't created that file. I stumbled over to the laptop, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I double-clicked it. An audio recording began. It was my voice from earlier that day practicing the very new segment about the collector. But the audio was raw, slightly distorted, and under my own perfectly enunciated words, I could hear something else. A faint, rhythmic sound. Snip, snip, snip. And the sound of quiet, wet breathing. Impossibly close. He hadn't just been watching me. He had been listening. He had been right there.
I slammed the laptop shut with a strangled cry, shoving it away from me so hard it skittered across the glass coffee table and crashed to the floor. The sound of plastic cracking echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the room. A silence broken only by the drumming of the rain and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. My sanctuary was gone, violated. He had been in my home. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, searching the shadows, expecting to see his hunched form emerge from behind my bookshelves, from the dark hallway leading to my bedroom. My skin crawled with the phantom sensation of his gaze. I felt a desperate, primal urge to run, but where? The security I had paid a fortune for, the doorman, the key cards, the top floor solitude? It was all an illusion. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen, and dialed the emergency number. But as the call connected, as I heard the calm, procedural voice of the operator, the words died in my throat. What would I say? That I got a weird package? That a file appeared on my laptop? They would think I was a hysterical celebrity, another public figure cracking under pressure. They wouldn't believe me. The quiet, wet breathing from the recording filled my ears, and with a surge of cold dread, I hung up. I couldn't trust the police. I couldn't trust anyone. He was smarter than them. He was a ghost, and he had just let me know he could touch me whenever he wanted. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I huddled in the corner of my living room, a kitchen knife clutched in my white-knuckled fist, watching the windows until the gray, watery light of dawn bled into the sky. The next morning, I was a ghost myself. I went into the studio on autopilot, my face a mask of makeup hiding the dark circles under my eyes. I read the news with perfect, hollow precision. No one noticed anything was wrong. I was so good at wearing the mask, I had forgotten what it felt like to take it off. I told myself it was a prank, a sick, twisted fan who had somehow bypassed security. I deleted the audio file without listening to it again and threw the little black box in a public rubbish bin miles from my home. I wanted to erase it, to pretend it never happened. But denial is a flimsy shield against true fear. The paranoia took root. Every creak of the floorboards in my apartment was him. Every stranger who held my gaze for a second too long on the street was him. The city, my city, began to feel like a cage, and I was the frightened animal pacing its bars. I started my own pathetic investigation, reviewing the security footage from my building's lobby. I watched hours of tape, my eyes burning from the screen, and found nothing. The flicker of static at the exact time the package must have been left. A 10-second gap. It was impossible. A technical glitch, Lars, the doorman, had said. But I knew it wasn't. It was him, a phantom in the machine. He was everywhere and nowhere. The feeling of being watched intensified until I couldn't bear it anymore.
I needed to escape. I needed silence. That's what led me to the cabin. My family had owned it for generations, a rustic little box of timber deep in the forests of Dalarna. It was a place from my childhood, a place I hadn't visited in 20 years. It had no internet, barely any cell service. It was completely isolated, miles from the nearest town. It was, I thought, but one place he couldn't find me: the point of no return. I didn't tell a soul where I was going. I just packed a bag, got in my car, and drove north, leaving my phone behind. The farther I got from Stockholm, the more the knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen. The dense, snow-dusted pines closed in around the road, a silent army of guardians. When I finally arrived, the cabin was just as I remembered it, a dark shape against the perpetual twilight of the Swedish winter. Snow lay in a thick, undisturbed blanket over everything. The silence was absolute. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the day building a fire, the simple physical act a balm to my frayed nerves. As night fell, I sat by the hearth, the warmth of the flames on my face, and watched the snow begin to fall again outside the single large window. I was safe. The thought was so powerful, it almost brought me to tears. And then I saw him. He wasn't in the cabin. He was outside, standing at the edge of the woods, almost perfectly camouflaged against the dark trunks of the pines. A hunched silhouette, motionless. He wasn't looking at the cabin. He was looking right at me. His face was pale in the moonlight, his eyes two wide, dark pools of frantic intensity. A smile stretched his lips, a grotesque, unnatural curve. And on the belt around his waist, I could see them. The scissors, the pliers, the tweezers, an arsenal of gleaming silver tools catching the faint light from my window. He just stood there, watching me, the falling snow dusting his shoulders like a shroud. And I knew I hadn't escaped. I had led myself to the slaughterhouse.
My first instinct was to run, but my legs were frozen, turned to lead by a terror so pure and absolute it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My mind screamed, but my body wouldn't obey. He took a single deliberate step out of the tree line, then another. There was no rush. He moved with the unhurried patience of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. The front door. I locked it, I was sure of it, but as I watched him approach, a horrifying certainty washed over me. A lock wouldn't stop up. Nothing would. I scrambled backwards, away from the window, my hands searching for a weapon, anything. My fingers closed around a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It was cold and solid in my trembling grasp. It wasn't much, but it was something. The soft crunch of his footsteps and the snow stopped. Silence. A beat of my own thundering heart, then two, then three. Then a sound that made my blood freeze. A faint metallic scraping sound at the door. Not the sound of a key, but of something thin and sharp being worked into the old lock. I retreated further, backing myself into the small, dark corner of the cabin's single room, holding the poker out in front of me like a talisman. The scraping stopped. A soft click echoed in the stillness. The door swung open. He stood there, framed in the doorway, a hunched silhouette against the swirling snow outside. He closed the door gently behind him, sealing us in the suffocating silence. He didn't speak. He just looked at me with those wide, unblinking eyes, the disturbing smile never leaving his haze. For days, that's how it was. He never spoke a word. He would sit in the chair opposite the fireplace, calmly, methodically, sharpening his tools. The scrape of metal on stone was the only sound in the cabin.
a grating and nerve-shredding rhythm that drilled into my skull. He would force me to watch as he performed his rituals, his small acts of psychological warfare. He pulled a glass jar from a deep pocket in his coat. It was filled with a clear liquid, and floating inside were dozens of small, shriveled gray things, tongues. He would take them out one by one with a pair of long tweezers and clean them with a small brush, his movements precise and reverent. He was preparing a space for a new addition to his collection. My addition. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, amplifying every small sound. The pop of the fire, the drip of melting snow, the frantic beat of my own heart. It was a silence that mocked me. A woman who had built an empire on sound. He was stripping me down, piece by piece, taking away everything I was, even before he took the final prize. The end came on the third day. The fire had died down to glowing embers and the cabin was cold. He rose from his chair, the smile on his face wider, more ecstatic than I had ever seen it. His hands were shaking. It was time. He came towards me, and this time I didn't freeze. A surge of pure, primal adrenaline shot through me. I screamed, a raw, wordless sound of defiance, and swung the iron poker with all the strength I had. I caught him in the shoulder, the impact of jarring up my arm. He grunted, stumbling back a step, but the smile never faltered. He looked at the blossoming red stain on his jacket with a kind of detached curiosity, then looked back at me. His speed was shocking for a man of his posture. He lunged, and my world exploded in pain. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it until I heard a sickening crash. The poker clattered to the floor. He dragged me, kicking and fighting, to the heavy wooden chair he had been sitting in and threw me into it. His strength was inhuman. He held me down with one hand, his face just inches from mine. His breath was sour, hot on my skin. "It's a mercy," he whispered, the first and only words he ever spoke to me. His voice was a dry, rasping hiss. He forced my head back against the chair. I could see the wild, frantic joy in his eyes, the unholy ecstasy of a zealot about to perform his holiest rite. My past and my future collided in that single horrific moment. The little girl with the cup and tangled tongue, the celebrated anchor woman with the golden voice, they were both here, both about to be silenced forever. He forced my mouth open, his rough fingers digging into my cheeks. I saw the glint of the small silver pliers in his other hand. He brought them to my lips. I tried to scream, to bite, to fight, but it was useless. He pinched my tongue, the cold metal sending a jolt of agony through my entire body, just as his father had taught him. He began to pull. The pain was a white-hot nova, a universe of agony that eclipsed everything else. A sound tore from my throat. A sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a life being unmade, of a soul being ripped apart. And then there was only the copper heat taste of blood, and the final horrifying silence.
They found me 2 days later, a local hunter who saw the smoke still trickling from the cabin's chimney. I was huddled in the corner, catatonic. The floorboards around me stained a dark, rusty brown. He was gone. He had taken what he came for and vanished back into the forest, leaving me alive in a tomb of silence. I survived, but the Nicole who had walked into that cabin was dead. The voice that had been my fortress, my weapon, and my salvation was gone. In its place was a gaping, bloody wound and a silence more profound than any I had ever known as a child. The little girl who couldn't speak her own name had won in the end. The shame I had spent a lifetime running from had finally caught me, embodied in a hunched man with a belt full of scissors. But he had underestimated me. He thought my voice was my power. He was wrong. My power was my will.
After months of recovery, of learning to live in a world without sound coming from my own lips, I did something no one expected. I went back. I walked back into that brightly lit studio, not to sit behind the anchor's desk, but to stand beside it. I learned sign language, mastering its fluid, expressive grammar with the same obsessive drive that had once fueled my pursuit of linguistic perfection. My hands became my new tongue. I became the station's primary sign language interpreter. And so my story, once a tale of abject horror, became something else. Every night I appear on the screen, a visible scar on my face from where he held me, a constant reminder of the monster in the woods. But I am not a victim. My hands fly. They dance. They argue. They declare. They tell the stories of the world with a clarity and a passion that my perfect practice voice never could. I found a new way to speak, a new purpose, born from the ashes of my greatest fear. He didn't silence me, he just taught me a new language.
The horrors linger. Thank you so much for watching or listening. By liking and subscribing, you're helping me summon the next chilling tale from the shadows. Join our community of the brave and prepare for what's to come.